I want to welcome everybody to the March meeting of the Kentucky Civil War Roundtable. We ought to have an interesting and fun evening. In terms of news, Chris, do you have anything you want to say to the members?
Well, I think, the roundtable's holding up very well financially, mostly because we haven't had any significant expenses. But we had a great year with a lot of good donations from a lot of supported members, which is really encouraging. That kind of helped carry us. And we want to remind anybody who hadn't paid their dues, please do so by the end of the month so we can keep you on the membership roll. Dues are $100 and $120 for a couple. And also, I want to remind everybody tonight that we'll have a chat. We have the chat feature on your computer that you can type in any questions you might have for our speaker at the end of his presentation. And the presentation will be on our website in a few days. So if you want to catch it again, or if you missed part of it tonight, you can see it then.
Very good. Very good. The only thing I want to mention to you is the May meeting, which will be also by Zoom. And we will have a fellow speak to us by the name of Steve Phan. Steve is the current chief of interpretation at Camp Nelson National Monument. This is now a National Park Service facility. Steve came to Camp Nelson from the Defenses of Washington National Monument. And the defenses of Washington include all the forts built around Washington in the west of Washington, north and south of Washington, many of which are still standing. And he is going to speak to us about the defenses of Washington. And it's a talk that you rarely hear, and it ought to be really interesting. He's quite an entertaining fellow. And so you might look forward to the May meeting with Steve Phan. With respect to our speaker tonight, Pete Carmichael is an old friend. He has been a friend of this roundtables for a good number of years. He spoke here 2 years ago, I think. He is the Robert Fluhrer Professor of Civil War History at Gettysburg College. And as such, he is also the director of the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College that meets every June. And those meetings usually bring out a large number of people and a great battery of speakers. And but he oversees that as well as serves as the professor of Civil War Studies. Peter has written a number of books. The first was Lee's Young Artillerist, William R.J. Pegram, a great story, a great book about a young artilleryman in the Army of Northern Virginia. He also wrote Audacity Personified, the Generalship of Robert E. Lee, which also is a very good book. And if there was ever a general who was audacious, it was Robert E. Lee. Finally, he's also the author of the book he's going to speak about tonight. And that's The War for the Common Soldier, How Men Thought, Fought, and Survived in Civil War Armies. So this ought to be a very entertaining talk, a very interesting talk. And I want to welcome my old friend, Peter Carmichael. Pete?
Being in Lexington right now, I'm so looking forward to it. In fact, I didn't even thought about taking my 2 girls. I have 15-year-old daughters and love horses, and they were excited about the prospect of coming to horse country. Central PA has many virtues, especially if you're interested in the Civil War, but not much in the way of horses. So I hope I'll get an invite soon. And,
you will, Pete.
I hope so.
You bet.
You can't overlook, and again, this just says that I'm a glutton for punishment, is I'm a native of Indiana. That's where I first met Kent. I was just a kid. I was, I think, an 8th grader or a freshman. Kent came and spoke on artillery. I was on the bombardment and Pickett's charge. And as a native Hoosier, of course, I was raised to not like things in Kentucky. Heard all kinds of Kentucky jokes when I was a kid. But when it came to Kentucky basketball, we were all very serious. I still remember the day that you all beat us in 1974. Sean May had a broken arm and lost. We were undefeated and we got beat by Kentucky. I remember when Kyle Macy from Perum, Indiana decided to go to Kentucky. My dad never forgave him. And I won't even tell you the things that my father used to say. So, but the sad part about it is, hell, you all don't even think about IU basketball. People in Indiana don't even think about Indiana basketball anymore, except for today. They just fired their coach. This says everything about the state of higher education. We could go to alums in Indiana and say, we need $10 million for a new wing to the library. And they'd say, no, maybe. Oh, but hey, we need to fire our basketball coach. And guess what? They found that $10 million. So, yeah, that's priorities in higher ed. Before I get started, I get a kind of a serious note here. A word of appreciation to a man who meant a great deal to me in my career, and I know he meant a great deal to your roundtable, and that's Dr. Robertson. Dr. Robertson's work, right? He was always, again, so kind and so thoughtful and so supportive, and just such a wonderful historian who had that gift to be able to capture the spirit, really, of the common soldier. And his dissertation, which was his first book, The Stonewall Brigade, I cut my teeth on that book when I was a kid.
Yeah.
In the Indianapolis Roundtable as well. I loved hearing him speak. And he's just a fantastic speaker. You know, I get the opportunity to get to work with him. My first book was published because of Dr. Robertson. Saw him, you know, maybe less than a year before he passed, and we were able to do an interview here at CWI that's on C-SPAN. I think it's probably the last interview that anyone did with Dr. Robertson. So, you know, I give this talk in honor of Dr. Robertson and in honor of Dr. Robertson's mentor. His graduate advisor was Bell Wiley. Many of you have, I'm sure, read The Life of Johnny Reb and also the Life of Billy Yank. Those were foundational and still remain foundational books in this field. And so it's this body of work that I confronted when I was given the assignment to write this book. And when I say assignment, this book is part of a series. It's called the Littlefield Series. It's published by the University of North Carolina. The Littlefield Series tackles a main issue or problem in the field of Civil War history. I obviously did The Common Soldier. Carrie Janey did a book on reconciliation during the Reconstruction period. Liz Barron did it on the coming of the war. James McPherson did a volume on navies, and the list goes on. Earl Hess did it on the West, right? So I was honored to get this opportunity, but it was, again, a formidable challenge to take the work of previous scholars, to bring it together, and then to come up with an original argument. So I struggled. I struggled for about 10 years, until I sort of found my way out of it. I found my way out of it. And what I mean by that is I needed to bring, you know, a new dimension to this field. And what I got somewhat troubled by is that scholars before me, that they had emphasized the role of ideas or ideology in helping soldiers make meaning of the world, help them find purpose to their daily struggles of being a soldier. And after a while, I valued those conclusions, and it is undeniable that soldiers on both sides, they had strong convictions, and these people were deeply political. But I thought there was just a straight line that ran between ideas and action, and that just was unsatisfying to me. I thought there was a degree of confusion that soldiers that they wrestled with, because as we all know, that transition from civilian life into the ranks, it was a tumultuous one. It never stopped. Men adjusted and they adapted, but they lived in a world in which they exerted very little control over their daily lives. And so these men wrestled with this, and they wrestled with it in ways that I felt like the scholarship hadn't completely captured. And what really brought my attention to this, now, I heard a drum roll before. Here's a drum roll, because whenever I mess around with technology, there is a poltergeist. And so here we go. I'm going to click a little button, and supposedly it will go to the next slide. And there we have it. This book, man, I love this book. I just was at the Gettysburg Visitor Center and saw it, picked it up off the shelf. And a fascinating story about the letters that are published, and a great title, No Freedom Streaker. Catherine Aldridge, Katie Aldridge, not a professional historian. She and her husband had purchased a farmhouse in upstate New York. She said that the attic was just a shambles. It was just filled with all kinds of things. And they were throwing stuff out, rummaging around, and they came across an old whiskey box. And inside that whiskey box were a bunch of Civil War letters, and they were from Charles Biddlecombe, 147th New York, Charles Biddlecombe. You look at these letters, you'll see that there were many masks that soldiers wore. There wasn't just one side, one face. And again, that was part of my concern, that I felt that so much that had been written about the common soldier, that had stressed ideas and ideology, that helped us understand that these, again, were people of conviction. But I think it also created an artificial appearance of they were just men of duty. Right? Men of duty, regardless of the circumstances or the situation, that they pushed and they prevailed. And I felt that so much was lost. So much was lost in the internal debates that these men had with themselves, and they had with their comrades, as well as their family. And so this is a big point of my book. It's one that I stress on the battlefield. As you can only imagine, man, can you imagine having Gettysburg as your classroom? It's the greatest thing ever. I can be just absolutely dull as hell, and I've got the battlefield to save me every time, right? I've got this great classroom. I just want a little side note here again. I want to digress. One of my prized students, Cameron Sowers, he is graduating this year from Gettysburg College, and he is coming in the fall to University of Kentucky to get his master's and maybe his PhD in history. He's going to study under Amy Merrill Taylor. I could not be happier for him. And he is very, very excited to come to the Bluegrass State. And I don't even need to say what I told him. I said, don't you come back a Kentucky basketball fan. We're done. We're done. So just one quick side note there. I'm very excited for Cameron and hope that he will get an opportunity to come to the roundtable and to meet you all. He's a really good kid, or I should say, a good young man. So the scholarship, again, this one-dimensional look of these are men of duty. When you read, and you'll hear in just a moment, that Charles Biddlecombe was many different things at very different times during the war. And I think that has been lost in our study of the common soldier. So a little bit about Charles Biddlecombe. He did enlist in 1861. He got sick and he returned home. And now here's another critical or crucial point to my book, and the thing that I sort of lost sight of, that I stress on the battlefield. Don't think for a moment that you can understand these soldiers if you do not connect them to their private lives. If you don't connect them to their wives, to their mothers, to their sweethearts, that link to the home was absolutely vital. This link was more than just, women sending letters that says, keep your spirits up, honey. It's more than that. These letters were deeply political. I was shocked, in part, that I was so blind for so many years to how the exchanges between men and women were deeply political. I was shocked that after so many years that I somehow did not see that the emotional exchanges between these men and women were very open and extremely revealing. And so again, when you come to this battlefield and you, as we all do, want to understand the decisions that were made, we should never lose sight of the fact of what these men never lost sight of, and that's of the people back home. And this is critical for Charles Biddlecombe because his decision to go in the Army in 1864 And I'm a little still uncertain of what he did. I think he enlisted to avoid the draft and thus got a bounty. But another record suggests that maybe he was conscripted. Nonetheless, he came in 1864 for redemption. Redemption for his family. He, as you're going to discover, he didn't much like anybody except for his wife. He's perpetually grouchy, always a critic, and believed that his family didn't love or respect him. And he thought that if he got into the Army, that of course would earn him the recognition of being a man that he felt that he was not getting back home. So he joins in the fall of 1863. He gets on a train. The first night he gets off at Elmira. A guard hands him a blanket and maybe a little bit of a ration, but nothing more. To have him just sleep on a dirt floor. He woke up the next morning, scribbled a letter to his wife and said, I got to find a way to get out of this. So he is almost demoralized after his first day in the Army. He gets down to the Army of the Potomac later that fall, assigned to the 147th New York. The regiment, as many of you know, took such serious losses on July 1st here at Gettysburg. See, everything comes back to Gettysburg. I'm trained, programmed to say that by the Chamber of Commerce here in Adams County. So he's in the 147th New York. Man, his situation gets worse. He really doesn't respect the officers. He thinks they're all incompetent. He doesn't have a high regard for his fellow soldiers as well. Every march is pointless in his mind. His body started to break down, and it broke down pretty quickly. After one march in the fall, he passed out. He said that and I'm going to have to be graphic here. He said that he had a discharge. How many times did he say this here? He said he had over 30 passages of the bowels with much blood and mucus. He was so weak that he could not stand up. He then went to the doctor, the surgeon, of course, to get a medical pass. The surgeon would not hear of it because Biddlecombe had done what? He had taken money. He'd taken money and he'd become a bounty to get into the Army, right? And so the doctor reminded him that he should have thought about this, should have thought about his illness, his weak body, before he took the money. December 27th, just 2 days after Christmas, of 1863, he wrote this. Cursed be the day that I saw my name drawn as a conscript, and damned be the hour that I made up my mind to come as a draftee. I think sometimes that if it was not for you and my children, I would blow out my brains. Damn the South, damn the war, and all that had anything to do in getting it up. I need to point out that the title, No Freedom Shrieker, right, is a point that he did not see himself as either an abolitionist or a Union man. He despised almost both parties. He especially had, I think, a lot of vitriol for the Lincoln administration, but he saw this war as a consequence of really incompetent political leadership. So at this stage, and this is what's crucial, listen to me carefully, initially he is, in a sense, non-political, or I should say non-partisan. That's going to change. That's going to change. Now it's the spring of 1864, and he has some buddies in the regiment, and they're tired of the war, and they point to the Blue Ridge Mountains. In fact, they call themselves the Blue Ridge Brigade. The Blue Ridge Brigade, their intent, get to those mountains and head north, escape, right? Desert, run away. And they nearly talked Biddlecombe into doing just that. But he decided to stay with the regiment, and his reward was the Overland Campaign. And as you all know, relentless fighting at the beginning of May, running all the way through the month until the beginning of June, right? And Biddlecombe is absolutely in the thick of it. He scribbles also a few notes during the campaign. These notes that he scribbled to his wife are no more than declarations of survival. And he is clearly just sort of bewildered as to what he's going through, and utterly surprised that he's still standing, right? It's incomprehensible that he's living and others are not. And so there is a lull, as you all know, really kind of after Cold Harbor, before they made the advance across the James. And it's during that period in June that Biddlecombe writes the following. I hate this life worse than a cat does hot soup. If I ever get out, I will stuff my old uniform with straw, stand it up in one corner to look at when I feel out of humor, just to remind me that home, with its little cares and troubles, is not the worst place in the world for a man to enjoy life. Clearly not a happy camper, as you can tell, but it is, again, a point that I want you to get to recognize. This is not surprising or shocking to any of you. Anyone who came out of the Overland Campaign, of course, was stunned by what they had endured. And of course, they all long for a home. You can say that that's all this is, Mr. Carmichael. It is a soldier who is tired of getting shot at and just wants to get himself back with his family. What I want to say to you all is this. When it comes to the issue of combat, I think we are too quick to judge that these men were just victims of what they endured on the battlefield, or that they conquered it. It's a binary and it's a false one, right? It's either victims or victors. How's that? I'll do a little alliteration there. Victims or victors. My answer to you all is that they were more conflicted, and I'll show you why. Here's a sack coat, right? That's not his, but in case you've never seen a sack coat before, that's what it looks like. This is just a few weeks after he wrote the letter about how he hated his life, worse than a cat does, Hatsu. Yep. He received a new jacket, a new sack coat. He had to get rid of the old one, the one that he wanted to fill with straw and use as a punching bag, that coat, he had to get rid of it. When he had to get rid of it, he wrote this: I'd like to save it as a souvenir of the hard-fought battles of the Wilderness, Laurel Hill, Spotsylvania, North Anna, and Petersburg. I should like to keep it with all of its dust samples of different soil from Culpeper to this place. It is not much of a coat now. The skirt's torn and ragged, and it is sadly ripped under the arms. Still, I look at it as it hangs on the butt of my musket. I think more of it than I ever did of any article of dress I ever owned in my life before. Can you believe that, man? That is a radical shift in his opinion toward his coat. But what does his coat symbolize? Well, his coat obviously symbolizes his very conflicted feelings toward combat. If you have to generalize, and we do, of course, from time to time, I think a fairly safe generalization about Civil War soldiers and combat, they are conflicted. There were times, as I think all of you have read in soldier letters, that these men derived a deep emotional thrill, excitement from combat. And for Biddlecombe, more importantly, he finally found affirmation of being a man. And it was something that he could not surrender, refused to surrender. He had seen too much, done too much. And of course, he had witnessed the killing of his comrades. There was no turning back. And with that, Charles Biddlecombe increasingly became more outspoken in favor of the war and in favor of the Lincoln administration. And yet every single letter has him grumbling and complaining and downright angry about being stuck in the ranks. And that is the point here, my friends. Do you see that what we've done as historians is that too often we take a quote, we extract that quote, and then that quote supports this generalization. Civil War soldiers were brave and courageous and men of duty. But you know what? We all could do what? We could easily go and find another letter and find another quote that would refute that. So I think what we should do here, and what I try to do in the book, because the book is just a series of case studies. And it's a series of case studies that reflect how men's thinking and actions, they were sometimes not in alignment at all. And that's important for us to recover. It is important for us to show those tensions, right? That they didn't see the world with clear eyes, and they didn't always act upon it in decisive ways. They're like, in a sense, well, of course they are, all historical actors, including us, right? I mean, I don't trust anybody who wakes up in the morning and thinks that they understand this world. Anyone who has that kind of certitude, I'm quite certain I don't want to listen to. And that's why I don't listen to any journalists. I don't care what persuasion they are. I don't want to hear it. I want to hear people who recognize and understand the importance of uncertainty. And that's what plagued Civil War soldiers. That's what certainly plagued Charles Biddlecombe. He was, again, deeply conflicted. So how we often You know, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to stop here. My daughter's just decided to play the piano. Of course, she never ever wants to practice until I'm doing this. Let me just have one moment here. Hey, I can't have you practice piano. I can't have it. I can't. No, sorry, that's me out. She won't be coming to the Kentucky Civil War Roundtable next time we come now. Right? No horse trip for her. All right. So the point is this. We see Civil War soldiers in binaries, right? Either they're brave, right, or they're cowards. They're dutiful or they dissent. Those binaries, what they miss is that these men can be all these things. And that's exactly what Charles Biddlecombe was. He was all those things at different times. I've already given you one idea as to why we've not been able to see that. And we've not been able to see it because how historians have extracted, or you could say they cherry pick quotes, right? They cherry pick quotes. Hell, I'm guilty of it. Kent Masterson Brown, the great Kent Masterson Brown, he's guilty of it as well. We are all guilty of it. But I also want to note that the soldiers themselves made it difficult for us. They made it difficult for us after the war when they wanted us to see them as men who were always facing forward, never afraid, always doing their duty. That's how they wanted to be remembered for the most part. And so they sometimes got, let's just say, creative in talking about their war experiences. Let me give you one example of that. So, Confederate veteran, early 20th century, he's telling a story. He's a survivor of the crater. And he said that when he was at the crater, and I'm going to give you this right now, and it's a reunion, he said he remembered the following, that when the crater was, to quote, blowed up, he said the men was thrown in the air and we went up. And when we went up, we met our captain coming down. And as the captain went down by, he hollered, "Rally, boys," when you hit the ground. Now, those kinds of romantic tales, we've read them, we've heard them, and I should note, I need to give a little hat tip here. Who do you think said that story? And told it, of course, much better than I did. It was Dr. Robertson. That's where I heard it from. So these romantic tales, this cherry picking, like, what can we do here? Well, I'm suggesting this is what we should do. I think we need to understand that these men recognized early on that they were governed by circumstances. They were governed by their environment. That was shocking to them on both sides. They truly believed in the power of individualism, that individual will, individual action, that would ultimately determine the outcome of events. They were utterly convinced of that. And they were not entirely shaken from that belief. And I have to keep going to the well here and go back to Gettysburg. And we've all stood at Spangler Woods. We've all looked across those fields toward Cemetery Ridge. We've all wondered what compelled these men to do what they did. And there are many, many explanations for that. And I want to say that I hope we will all have a spirited conversation about that after I get done talking. But one of the reasons why they did it is that they were convinced that individual action, that a man of courage, they could ultimately win and determine the outcome of a military event on the grand scale of something like Gettysburg. To us, that might seem naive, suicidal. Whatever judgment you might have, should not forget that in their heart of hearts, they believed that courage could ultimately dictate, again, the outcome of a battle. And they were not wrong. Again, Pickett's Charge, I just want to get a side note here about Pickett's Charge. I mean, one of the great myths about Pickett's Charge is it was doomed from the beginning, just absolutely not the case. And in fact, Pickett's men, they get locked up against the Philadelphia Brigade right on Cemetery Ridge. And yes, there's only really 3 small breakthroughs. And yes, one of those breakthroughs is, God, can't possibly be more than 100 men. But did you realize that an entire company of the 69th Pennsylvania, right there at the copse of trees, was captured and sent back to Seminary Ridge? Now listen, I'm not trying to suggest to you that there was this great opportunity, and I'm not suggesting that this was Lee's best decision. What I'm saying to you is that a frontal attack, when well executed, which Pickett and Pettigrew's charge most certainly was, that it had a reasonable chance of success. And as we know, what happened after the war, there are plenty of examples of where frontal attacks worked. And we should also note, hell, there aren't many options here, my friends, right? Everyone would love to do a flank attack, but of course you got to have the element of surprise for that. So my point being is that this belief in willed behavior, it in fact was affirmed on the battlefield. And I tell you all time and time again, you know, you want to go to the battlefield and just treat it as a chessboard. That's certainly you're right. But I'm telling you, I don't think that that's the best way of honoring and remembering these men. We have to situate them within their cultural world. And that's certainly what I tried to do. And so with the power of these circumstances, what these men, I think they became were pragmatists. And that pragmatism reveals itself in a wide range of ways. And so there is a flexibility in thought as well as a flexibility in action. And I'll give you two more examples here. Just check on my time. I think we're doing well. I used to think digressions weren't a good thing, and I obviously don't agree with that anymore. I think it is a good thing. It takes off the cadence and the rhythm here, which again gives people a chance to sort of stir around and think about something different. I had a discussion today with my students. I'm teaching a class on race and slavery in the American South. I consider myself as much a Southern historian as I am a Civil War historian. We read a fantastic book. It's called Never Caught. It's about an enslaved woman who ran away from the Washingtons when they were in Philadelphia. It is just a beautiful book. And I think that it does not suffer from presentism at all. So I had a class, I don't know, about 28 students. And so we talked about how this book affected their perception of George Washington as a founding father, as a president, as a person. Every single student, and I should note, I sit on the sidelines here, right? My classroom is not a classroom for me to impose my ideas on them, just as this roundtable is not an opportunity for me to impose my ideas on you guys. Get them out there and, of course, let the chips fall. But in this situation, this is a discussion. Every single student in that classroom, they said that the most important thing to do is to situate Washington within his time and within his context. And that the fact that he was a slaveholder that was, again, probably in comparison to his peers, a little bit more moderate, and certainly he had more moral reservations about slavery than Jefferson did and acted upon those, I believe. But I think what's reassuring here, and that's why I'm telling you all this, I know my sample is small, but I've seen it time and time again. Young people who care deeply about history, that's an important point for you to take away today. And the second thing is, you know, the media in particular, and yes, I have to say and hate to say that there are elements within the academy that are utterly strident in their views, but that's not always mainstream. And you have to be careful here, man. CNN and Fox and MSNBC, they live off of cherry picking. That's what they do. They cherry pick. They all do it. They're all wrong for doing it. And they're all creating these horrible misperceptions. Horrible. I boycott them all, and they deserve to all be boycotted. Because what they are doing just irreparable damage to how we see each other. I'm just reminded of, 1860, and please, we're not anywhere close to the Civil War. That is just nonsense. I can't bear to hear that crap. But I will say this to y'all. How were Republicans portrayed in the South? The Black Republicans, man, most Republicans were not abolitionists. And that's the kind of distortions we're dealing with now, because the press, again, all of them, they're all in the same bed together because they all are sucking off the teat of corporate America and advertising. It's all about ratings. And I hope that you all will take what I said to heart and tell others, because we send 35 students, including Mr. Fan, Steve Fan, you'll hear next month. He was one of the kids when he was a kid who I sent out to a national park. Summer job. I'm so happy that he is at Camp Nelson and works over at DC as well. He is fantastic. There are more kids, young people who care about the past and who do good historical work than what you can imagine. Please don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. They need your support. They need your belief. Right? What they have to say and what they have to do matters. And I'm telling you, 35 students, Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College, were placing at Civil War national parks this summer. I'm happy to talk more about that. So I'm going to give you, I think I'm just going to give you one more example. And then I'd like for you to take a look at a letter. I'm going to sort of show you how I do some research. And then, of course, you can then say, man, he's full of it. And you know what? Feel free, go right at it. I'm sure I can handle it. So I'm going to give you one example about this pragmatism. And soldiers, Alexander Keever, he is in the Army of Northern Virginia. He is a North Carolinian. He came to the Army in 1863. He has a wife, I suspect at least one or two kids. And he is not a happy camper as well. He receives letters from his wife conveying her frustration, actually her desperation back on the home front, of course, encouraging him to desert. And his letters survive well into the spring of 1865, which that's pretty rare. It's hard to find a lot of letters from that period of the war. So the unique set of letters, and he, like other Confederates around Lee's army, perplexed about what to do. He sees that the army is melting away. He sees every day from the trenches and looking across what we would call no man's land. I've never seen the area between Union and Confederate lines at Petersburg called a no man's land. I think that's just a World War I term, but that's how we would know it, or how we know it. So he saw Confederates running across. He saw Confederate pickets who were taking shots at these deserters, but they were purposely missing. Let me show you. There we go. And that's from Leslie's, the Northern paper, a woodcut, depicting again, you can see some men in the background running and giving themselves up to Union pickets, and then, of course, taking the oath of allegiance. So Keever, he's tempted and he does not know what to do. And he doesn't know what to do because he is a pragmatist. He is a pragmatist who first looked very carefully at the situation that he was facing. So I love this line. This is probably February of 65. It's to his wife, of course, and they're going back and forth about whether he should desert or not. And he wrote, "For it is better for a man to trust in the Lord than to run a risk to desert. For there was a man left our company last week, and he was taken back up and brought back and put in the guardhouse, and he may be shot." As you all know, Civil War Americans, Northerners and Southerners, especially in the ranks, they are deeply religious people. And for the most part, they believe in providence, that God's hand directed human affairs for the benefit of God's vision. And in fact, God would ensure that his chosen people, that they would be protected and they would ultimately be what? They would be preserved. Well, this was a belief that was embattled. I think that's the best way of putting it. It was an embattled belief on both sides. On the micro level, meaning day-to-day living, soldiers discovered that usually the most moral men, the most pious, that did nothing to protect them from a sickness or a bullet. And often it was the men who were immoral, who were drunkards and chasing women and doing all kinds of things that were not Christian. They often survived. And so what you find with soldiers on both sides, and I saw it time and time again, was confusion. Confusion that they could not figure out God's ways. And a nagging doubt that God maybe just sort of cut people loose. Let them fight this thing out. Poor soldiers in particular, man, their letters break my heart. There's another little quick digression, and one that I hope you will all check out. It is a site on the internet called Private Voices. Private Voices. Write it down. Now, I'm being serious here. You might want to put Private Voices and then put Civil War letters. If you just put Private Voices, God knows what you'll come up with. You might see some things you won't want to see. Private Voices and Civil War letters. The site is dedicated to letters from mostly Confederate, but some Union, men who were semi-literate or illiterate. They spoke their letters, my friends. They are powerful things, powerful, powerful. And these poor men, man, they didn't frame this war in terms of Confederate nationalism. They didn't frame this war on the northern side between emancipation and Union. Man, it's a grind, and they're trying to get through it. They're trying to get through it. And these poor dudes, especially on the Confederate side, time and time again after defeat, their worry is that the officers are going to get everyone shot and killed, and no one's going to end this thing. It's going to be true annihilation. That's their deep fear. And that's what, again, is I think so what impressed me and what I think is important about my book is the reframing of how these men saw their world and navigated through it, right? They didn't take the ideology that we see in their letters and is important, but those ideas didn't frame their day-to-day actions. It didn't often shape the choices that they perceived. And so these very pious religious men, it's not a crisis of faith. They never gave up on God. They just weren't certain if God was there. They could feel his presence. And Cheever is one of those men. And I'm struck by this quote in front of you. Look at it again. He says, man, it's better to trust in the Lord. But wait a minute, if you get to the end of just that little quote, Cheever made it pretty clear. You can trust in the Lord all you want. But if you run away, the Confederate government might shoot you. Doesn't matter whether you trust in the Lord or not. So he sees the restrictions, the constraints. And I want to again stress this. When you think that Civil War soldiers just had free will in the ranks because they often didn't write about an execution, that's absurd. And there are limitations and constraints in every life of a historical actor. It's there, it's present. It's so accepted that there's no reason to write about it. But what kept Civil War armies together at the end of the day was the point of the bayonet, period. Who knew that better than anyone else was Stonewall Jackson. And so now we have Mr. Cheever. He makes it very clear, man, there's a lot to risk, a lot to risk. And here comes the practical side. Telling his wife, it is too far to walk, dangerous also. If I go home, I could not stay there unless I'd hide out. And that would be worse than to stay here. And if the officers would find me, they would send me back here and I would be shot to death, and it would be worse than to stay now. There he has it. About the circumstances, devoid of ideology. This is all about practicality. And he's spelling it out for his wife. He also, in another letter to his wife, he wrote to her that she needed to be cheerful. And I thought, well, that's a little insensitive of him. The woman is on the point of destitution. She's begging for some help here. And he's telling her just to buck up and be cheerful. And then sitting in church, reading some Proverbs in church. Cheerfulness, this, cheerfulness, cheerfulness, cheerfulness. Obvious. To be a good Christian is to be cheerful. Because a cheerful person, woman or man, does not fear the future, does not fear the outcome of the future, knows that their soul is what? It's going to be rewarded. The emotion of cheerfulness, to sustain that, is a sign of godliness. Look, all of us here have looked at letters when we try to understand the morale of armies. And we've often, I think, got it wrong. I know Civil War officers did. They always comment on their men. Oh, they're cheerful in the ranks. Cheerfulness didn't mean that they were loyal or dutiful to the cause. Cheerfulness often meant that it was about their spiritual side. And finally, cheerfulness was connected to a state of health, physical health. He wrote to her, he said, if you don't change and become cheerful, Cheever said that he'd come home and expect to find his wife just skin and bones. So we have to always remind ourselves that, as to use what's almost now a cliche, the past is what? It is a foreign land. It is a foreign land. They are not like us. And here's, I think, a good example of it. Now, here it is. It was last letter. This is now March of 65. And we'll stop with this letter. Dear wife, I do hope and trust in the Lord that this cruel war will soon end, so us poor soldiers will get home to see our beloved families. But I do not know how to wait any longer, but I will have to wait till it pleases the Lord for me to be loosed from this cruel yoke of bondage. If it is his will, then I will get to come home and see you all one more time. And if it is his will for me to die here, it is all right with me. It's too bad we don't have our little poll. We could take a a poll on whether you think Cheever deserted or not. Less than 2 weeks after he wrote this letter, he decided that he put his trust in himself and not God, and he ran the gauntlet. He ran across that no man's land, captured by Union soldiers, sent up north, prison camp of force, took the oath, and returned to North Carolina. I'm going to show you that letter. We're getting a little late, and I want to just show you one more thing. It's a great story about John Foster. And I'm going to show you this last letter. I think it's here. Yeah, it is. All right, let me see if I can go back. Oliver Wendell Holmes. There we go. Let's see. All righty, here we go. One more time. There, stay. There we go. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., you all know his story. Started in the 20th Mass, a Harvard regiment. By summer of 1864, he was on a staff, I believe, in the 6th Corps, and he had seen too much. And he had decided that it was time for him to come home. Now, this was not the first time that he had written his father and reprimanded his father. His father was, of course, no intellectual lightweight. So it's like two heavyweight champions, man, going back and forth. After Fredericksburg in 1862, his father, after Oliver had seen his buddies get slaughtered in the town of Fredericksburg and was just beside himself that he could not join his regiment, his father published a piece. I don't remember where. It might have been I'm not sure where it was now, but he published a piece, his father did. And the essence of it was, hey, we're going to be okay in the North. Why? Because our side is a more virtuous side. We basically have God. We have God who ultimately will see us through this. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., he was living, man. He thought that was nonsense. He wrote his father just that. He said, man, this is going to get more men killed. Like, what is going to win this war is professionalization. And so he continued to do his duty, as you know, grievous wound at Fredericksburg, wasn't at Gettysburg. And then he's eventually promoted up to staff. Then he decided it was time for him to go, time to come home. What I'm about to show you, or I should say read to you, it is the essence of pragmatism. It is that flexible conception of duty, which I hope you'll take with you today, because what it will do for you is it will help you see how these men could be many different things during the course of the war, and that we all need to guard against just stereotyping a soldier. They were just this or just that. They were many, many different things. When we do that, I think we humanize them. I think we sort of get closer to standing in their shoes. It's impossible to do, but we get closer to do it. And this is the letter that Holmes wrote to his father when he decided he was going to come back to Massachusetts. I started in this thing a boy, and I am now a man. And I have been coming to the conclusion for the last 6 months that my duty has changed. I can do a disagreeable thing or face a great danger coolly enough when I know it is a duty. But a doubt demoralizes me as it does any nervous man. And now I honestly think the duty of fighting has ceased for me, ceased because I have laboriously and with much suffering of mind and body earned the right to decide for myself how I can best do my duty to myself, to the country, and if you choose, to God. Thank you so much.
Wow. That's great, Pete. That was terrific.
It's off the shelf. There we go. Get this out. I can't see you all now. Can you see me?
No, I can't.
You can't?
No.
There we go. Now we're good.
There you go.
There's us. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm telling you, man, you gotta get me to come back. I'm so eager to come back and to see you all.
Well, don't worry. You'll be back for sure.
And how close is Camp Nelson to you all?
It's about 14 miles.
Oh man, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, it's lovely, and they've done a lot of great work there, and got a lot of great work yet to do. But Steve, even though he's kind of on loan there, I think really wants to stay here, and I hope he gets to. He's a terrific guy. Terrific guy.
You guys are gonna love him in May. He's a good dude. He took me out to some great Chinese food in Rockville, and our plate was filled. I think I didn't eat for 2 days after that.
Yeah.
He is a connoisseur of some good Chinese food.
Yeah. Well, your talk was wonderful, and
Good. Thank you so much. Happy to answer questions or hear any comments if you have any.
Well, tell us why it took 10 years to write. Is it 10 years to do the research, or you just put it
Well,
down?
a mixture of things. My wife had twins, so that kind of got in there.
Okay.
And just to be completely transparent, I switched jobs twice, and I got a little sick there for a while, and things didn't look very good for the home team. But I got out of that illness, and so I had some excuses, but really it was having to rethink how I looked at sources, and that's why I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to show this letter, because I look at Civil War letters very differently now. I used to just see them as a window into the past, and they said what they said, and you just sort of extract that and you get a feel for how these men thought. But I think that there's a deeper way of interrogating those letters, and not everyone agrees with it. And many of the people here know that my main professor is Gary Gallagher, and we are absolutely dear friends, and I have the utmost respect for him. And this is a sign of how we respect each other. He didn't really care for what I had done in this book. I mean, we've come to sort of maybe a sort of an agreement on why his opinion matters. That he's one of the editors here. And one of the things that troubled him was he felt that my digging into the sources was maybe a little bit deeper than what the evidence showed. I very much disagree with him about that, but that's of course what keeps us in business here, and is how it should be, right? You should be able to disagree and move on, and that's exactly what we did. So I had a little bit of a challenge with my editors, Dr. Gallagher being one of them as well, but it made the book better, right? And you just, like with any project, and can attest to this as well. And he's got a new book coming out on George Gordon Meade. I suspect he came into that project with certain assumptions, maybe even convictions, right? But you get in and you dig and you root around, and before you know it, you're like, wait, I feel about this a lot differently than I did before. And I want to always keep changing. I never want to be comfortable. I tell that to my students. Don't ever feel comfortable with what you think you know. Ever. Don't do it. It's a height of intellectual arrogance, which we have too much of that in this.
Yeah,
so that's why it took 10 years. That's
terrific. Pete, I loved the letter from Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. You talked about the 20th Massachusetts, which was his regiment, and when you were talking there, it reminded me that at Fredericksburg, when the emancipation was announced to the officers, half of them resigned in that regiment. And this is Massachusetts, for heaven's sakes. And yet, when you see in his letter, I want to make up my own mind what I want to do here. He was not alone in that regiment. It wasn't alone in the Army, period. But I mean, even in a regiment like the 20th Massachusetts, you had guys resigning.
Strong Democratic regiment, right?
Yes.
There is a fantastic book that happens to be right next to me, and that is this one. Another, he'd be a wonderful young speaker for you all. Zach Fry, a Republican in the ranks.
Yes.
At the political, in a sense, infighting between Democratic and Republican officers. It's some nasty partisan stuff. We know that, in Lee's Army in Northern Virginia, there was also that kind of infighting that never took the form to partisan organizations. But yes, the reaction to the Emancipation Proclamation among some units, like the 20th Mass, was certainly created a lot of turmoil. What Zach Fry has though found that after Fredericksburg and with the ascension of Joseph Hooker, that there is a move toward the Republican way of war. And again, it's just, I think it's why these studies of morale are so problematic, because we look at soldier letters and we say, look, these men believed in the war for union and for emancipation. If you look at these letters a little differently, I'm not saying they didn't believe that, but they're writing these things to convince other people to feel that way. That's a critical point here.
Yeah.
We are missing too often when we read a letter, oh, it just tells us about the past. It does, but it's written for a purpose and an intent. And if you miss that purpose and intent, then you really, I think, miss what is critical about these letters. And so what Fry found is these Northern Republicans are writing back to the newspapers and they are saying, look, we are united behind the war. Hell, they were united behind the war. I disagree a little bit with Fry about this. I mean, I think many of them were, but they were sending that back up to the North. And what was really, I think, about this book that was startling and disconcerting to me, and it really hit me hard when I was reading these petitions published in Northern newspapers in which Northern soldiers threatened to come back and they would shoot up any anti-war rally, and they threatened any Democratic press. We're coming in and we're going to break up your newspaper office, right? This is pretty anti-democratic stuff. We don't think about that, right, in our war, which again goes back to the nonsense that we hear today about all this. But I think that, and we hear the same thing on the Confederate side. I mean, these letters that I just adore, and they're close by. James Zimmerman, he's in the. It's Hoke's Brigade, so it's like 54th North Carolina, but it's Hoke's Brigade. It's a brigade that has some morale, desertion issues, and he makes it abundantly clear that the only reason that's keeping that regiment together after Gettysburg is that they've got guards all the way around it, right? And that dissension does not make it into the papers. Another soldier from that very same regiment said the officers had just published a newspaper account in the Salisbury papers and said that we're all behind the war. He said they're lying. We're not behind the war. We didn't vote this way. So these sources that we have there are really problematic. That should not surprise us at all. We just have to be more careful and more cautious in our assessments.
Wow. Do we have any comments from or questions from the audience?
Well, I had a couple that.
Okay.
When did we start seeing the level of desertion really pick up? Right after Gettysburg, or?
So for the Confederates and on the Union side as well, we'll stick with the Confederates here. I mean, often you would see it after a defeat in most cases, but it goes up and then it levels off. So after Gettysburg, there certainly was a spike in the Army in Northern Virginia. I think the Army sort of gets its equilibrium back by early October of '63, and certainly by spring of '64. I mean, their numbers. Now, again, the quality of the men, that's a different question. But the quality, the numbers for the Army in Northern Virginia, hell, they're back where they need to be, right? So it goes up and down. And then after, I think, Lincoln's election, again, with the Army in Northern Virginia, things, in my estimation, they unravel fairly quickly. The Army of Tennessee, I think you found something very similar. After Missionary Ridge, right, there's a little bit of a spike. What the officers do, they turn to the papers, they start publishing resolutions. These resolutions again say, hey, look, Southern people, yeah, we had a little mishap there at Missionary Ridge, but that's behind us. We're ready to go at it again. To a degree, that was the case, but you see how that, of course, covers up what? It covers up all that dissent. And these public documents are tricky things. So the Army of Tennessee, look at them, they're fine all the way until Hood gets a hold of them. And then after that, things start to decline.
Yeah. Interesting. Any other questions?
No.
None? Peter, you mentioned the 54th North Carolina with its soldiers saying, we'd like to, what was it, get out of this war or whatever, words to that effect. What I found striking is that, and this was supposedly after Gettysburg that they did this.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah, and they weren't even in the Battle of Gettysburg. They were guarding an ammunition train, and they never even got across the Potomac until like the 6th of July. And
so I might have that regiment screwed up then. I think his regiment did get in, so I might have the wrong regiment there.
Okay.
But I think, Kent, you make a very good point. Is that we have this cause and effect relationship, right? About, there's a battle, then there's a defeat, and then morale breaks down. The battle and its outcome is certainly critical to understanding how these men judged the progress of the war and whether there was a fighting chance or not.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing that's there. And I want to again stress the importance of the private lives of these men and that connection to the household. It is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
And you know, I have time and time again, I hear people say to me, well, soldiers are just kind of the same throughout time. And I guess you could find elements that are, you can see some parallels, but
Yeah.
look at the Confederate soldier.
Yeah.
Look at the fact that the government at the national level and at the state and local level provided very little to nothing really, but very little support services for those on the home front. Compare that to the soldier today.
Yeah.
Also make what I think is a critical point is the state of impoverishment that Confederate and Northern soldiers faced for much of the war. And I think it was intentional, especially on the Confederate side.
You bet.
I think they made sure that the paymaster didn't show up because a poor soldier, he can't desert. You got to have money to desert. There's no other way of doing it. And so what the Confederate soldier faced in terms of the support structure that the government and the military provided, whether it be for those who were left behind on the home front, whether it be clothing, food, pay, medical care, all of that, just no comparison whatsoever. And so when some people have said to me that a soldier who deserted had simply just abandoned his comrades, and this was a violation of duty that's absolutely unforgivable. Well, I don't feel like I'm in a position to make a judgment on whether it's forgivable or not, but I would note that many of the men at the time did not feel that way about those men who deserted. They understood why they had to do it.
Right.
And of course,
That's an excellent point. Just an excellent point. Have anything else you want to ask?
No, I think that's about out of time.
I've stumped the audience. I'm sorry. Not even a slam at Indiana basketball.
Pete, you know, I love what you said though about the decision to send Pickett and Pettigrew's divisions across the fields at Gettysburg. That I don't know how many times you hear people say, well, it was insane, should never have happened, shouldn't have done it. And, you know, I've often thought that if your average person today who thinks that could have looked on that battlefield after the fighting on July 2nd, including the fighting on the night of July 2nd, and seen the wreckage that was of the enemy, not only themselves, but the enemy, and couple that with how much losses the enemy, meaning the Army of the Potomac, suffered on the first day, but then to look at the wreckage on the second day, and the fact that more than 5,000 prisoners, Union soldiers, prisoners, were behind the Confederate lines. If you were Lee out there, you would say, look I've hit them on their right, I've mauled them on their left, and look, there's the result. These kind of attacks have won before. You call him audacious in your book.
I think the thing that's inexplicable and we'll never know is that why on the night of the 2nd, James Longstreet didn't make the effort to ride down Seminary Ridge and meet with Lee that evening. That's a mystery, right? And maybe, in fact, Lee, for whatever reason, didn't feel that was necessary. That failure to have a conversation is, again, very strange. I think the second thing that speaks to your point, Ken, and it's an important one, is not only the success, although not complete, of July 2nd, but most people who go to Gettysburg, and I say most, hell, I'd probably be up to 80% would be my guess, and that is they don't stand where Pickett's division started the advance. You stand where there is the paved trail from the Virginia Monument or the Lee Monument that takes you out to the edge of Spangler Woods. That gets you looking straight at the center of the copse of trees on Cemetery Ridge. Everyone thinks that Pickett's men were right there and they connected with Pettigrew and it was one long continuous front, which it was not. The Confederate attack looked like two separate assaults. And Pickett's division is sort of nestled off to the right And there's not a single sign, and I'm not blaming the Park Service for this. There's not a single sign that lets people know where Pickett's division was arrayed before the attack.
Yeah.
If you stand where Pickett's division was, you'll see that it had tremendous amount of cover until it really got to the Evansburg Pike.
Right.
And the artillery bombardment did exactly what it was supposed to do. That again, I think its failures are over exaggerated. It
Right.
knocked out much of the Union artillery.
It certainly
It
did.
allowed that infantry to get there. So the problem I think with Pickett's charge, and I blame again, I think this is probably on Longstreet and Lee, but it wasn't enough men. The very thing that Longstreet did better than anyone else in the Army of Northern Virginia, whether it is Second Manassas, whether it's Chickamauga, whether it's Wilderness, and he brought his entire command to bear in one concentrated blow, except where did he not do that? And it was, of course, on July 3rd. And I think he thought it was going to fail, and hell, his reservations, I think, doomed the attack. I mean, why Lang and Wilcox? You put 2 more brigades in that. Why not make sure the Mahone's brigade is in it, which is virtually untouched? All that kind of little details, which we'll never ever know why those things did not happen. There's speculation, my friends, just speculation. But it strikes me that that's one of the odd things. I mean, look, I'm not one of those guys who I'm in the Longstreet camp or the Lee camp. Hell, I'm in no one's camp. They don't need me in their camps. I'm just trying to figure this thing out, right? So, I mean, I have great admiration for James Longstreet. And but Gettysburg certainly was not, I think, one of his better days.
Yeah, it's great. Great. Is
Very
that,
good.
Can I say to your roundtable here, and I should have mentioned it before, unfortunately, we've had to cancel our conference, which is a great disappointment. Kent was going to come out, as he has done in the past. But we always give a discount to Civil War roundtables, right? And we'd love to have some Kentuckians out there with us.
well, we put it in our newsletter before it was canceled. So we were hoping to get some, but
well, we'd love for you all to come out. I think it's a really a wonderful event. No matter where your knowledge level is, you can be at Kent's level or you can be just a beginner, and there's a place for you there. And our topics are wide ranging, and you get choice. Right? You can hear military stuff, a mix of things, social, political. We're going to do some stuff on Civil War archaeology in 22. So I'd love to see some of you all come out. Really looking forward to you all meeting my student, Cameron Sowers. He is a good dude, and I'm so happy he's going to be working with Amy. She's a fantastic scholar.
yeah, I invited him to attend as my guest when we reconvene in the fall. So
again, he's not doing this to impress you. This is what he typically does. He wears bow ties. You don't see many young men of this generation. I tried to get him to wear scarves. If you can see behind me, I got a big pile of scarves there. There's now a moratorium on them. My family has decided no more scarves for Pete or any more suits. I interviewed James McPherson, and I told my wife, I said, I need to get a new suit. I need to get an Armani suit. I said, come on, Beth, I need it. I'm interviewing a Pulitzer Prize winning historian. And she said to me, well, when you get your Pulitzer Prize, you can get your Armani suit. That's pretty harsh. That's tough. I got 3 women. Keep you in line.
Well, Pete, let us see your book again.
yeah, let us see your book again.
It might be right here. It would just show it this way. How about
There you go. That's it.
Okay,
That's it.
Great.
And you all get a discount too. UNC was going to give you all a discount. There's a paperback version that just came out.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So they just need to tell UNC.
There is a code. I'll send it to you as
Good.
well. And
We'll
I'll
put
send to you. You can pass it around.
Yeah,
as
Right.
well.
Yeah, we'll put that in our newsletter.
We'll put it in the newsletter.
Good. I'll make sure you all get that
Okay.
as well. But
Peter,
it's just,
thank you.
Such a joy. Such a joy. I just want to say one last thing about Dr. Robertson. We all miss him so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
His spirit and his scholarship, as you can tell me, it lives on, right? It's a part of this book. It's a part of what I do when I go out and speak here in Kent, here in Kent when I was young, and here Dr. Robertson and all these people that I saw early on. Man, Kent's a busy man. He's a lawyer. He's traveling all over the place, but he comes up to Indianapolis, right, and speaks because he believes the importance of connecting to people. And I just want you all to feel good about the fact that there are a lot of young people out there. You're going to meet one, right, next month. He'll be right there speaking to you all. Cameron, there are all these young people out there who are really engaged in history. So it's a good thing. There's a lot to be optimistic.
Great.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Pete.
so much, Pete. You're such a
Enjoyed
good
it.
friend. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.